My 1-year anniversary with the company, I wrestled none other than the Golden Goose himself. The star, the moneymaker, the big...
Hulk Hogan ruled wrestling's golden era, but behind his fame was a hidden system of power that only The Undertaker dared to reveal. After years of silence, he's finally speaking out about the tunnel Hogan built to control everything, and it all traces back to the night of their very first match, the secret Hogan never wanted the world to know. When The Undertaker stepped into the ring with Hulk Hogan, he wasn't just facing a legend, he was stepping into the shadow of an entire empire. Hogan wasn't just a wrestler, he was an institution. The blonde handlebar mustache, the trademark bandana, and the real American theme song became symbols of the 1980s dream. But behind the lights, colors, and energy of the red and yellow spectacle, there existed something much darker. A hidden system known only to a few. It wasn't built beneath Titan Towers or inside Madison Square Garden. It was a tunnel made not of concrete, but of influence, connections, and quiet control. Hogan's secret network of favors, backstage deals, and unspoken rules shaped not just his own success, but, according to The Undertaker, changed the lives and careers of countless wrestlers who passed through WWE's locker rooms.
Brother, can I talk to you? I'm really nervous about taking the tombstone. I got this bad neck. I was like, look, I promise you, I'll take great care of you.
It was November 1991, marking The Undertaker's first anniversary in the company. He was still the quiet newcomer, humble and focused, the kind of man who let his actions in the ring do the talking. Standing across from him that night was Hulk Hogan, the face of Vince McMahon's empire, the Golden Goose, whose image had fueled millions in pay-per-views, merchandise, and sold-out arenas. They were set for a match that would crown The Undertaker as world champion, a historic moment in WWE history. But it wasn't the championship gold that would define that night, it was what happened before the match. Backstage, Hogan's uneasy words planted a seed of doubt and manipulation, something that would linger in The Undertaker's mind for decades to come.
We get into the match, and now it's time for the finish. Finish is where I'm going to tombstone him on a chair. I've given my kids rougher bumps than I give Hogan. I wrap him up. I've got him. The chair comes down. Boom. As soon as my knees touch, oh, brother, you got me. I'm like, oh. I just crippled the Golden Goose.
The Undertaker initially believed he had seriously injured Hulk Hogan's neck. Being the professional he was, he carefully reviewed the match footage, analyzing every move and impact, and that's when the truth hit him. Hogan's head had never even touched the mat. Yet, moments after the match, Hogan went straight to Vince McMahon's office, dramatically lying on the floor and claiming to be hurt. It wasn't confusion. It was a calculated move, a message. That was the night The Undertaker unknowingly entered Hulk Hogan's hidden tunnel, a world built on politics, manipulation, and carefully crafted illusions. Hogan didn't just rule inside the ring, he ruled perception itself. He could twist reality, control narratives, and turn friends into threats with a single story. His reach was so strong that even seasoned veterans stepped lightly around him. For The Undertaker, that night marked his harsh initiation into wrestling's darker truths. Fans often wondered why the two icons never seemed to connect, or why tension lingered during their brief title reigns. Years later, The Undertaker confirmed what many had suspected: what happened after that match was never about pain or injury, it was about trust. Hogan had broken that trust, and in a business where loyalty meant everything, that betrayal shattered something sacred in the locker room.
Sometimes in life, things come back.
All the podcasts and all the books and everything, and everybody realizes that Hogan wasn't the guy that he was portrayed to be.
Years later, when The Undertaker finally opened up about that time, his words carried the weight of years of silence. He wasn't just talking about a rivalry, he was exposing a hidden culture buried beneath decades of kayfabe and corporate storytelling. He revealed the structure of Hogan's secret tunnel, a system where power moved in one direction and truth was buried deep. And he wasn't the only one who had felt its shadow. Behind the scenes, other wrestlers began to see the same pattern. Bret Hart once described Hogan bluntly, calling him a fake hero who smiled for the cameras but buried his peers behind closed doors. The tunnel wasn't just Hogan's advantage, it was his shield. It protected him from blame and kept him untouchable, even as controversy followed him everywhere. By the mid-2000s, Hogan's name was tangled in one scandal after another, from the Gawker lawsuit to leaked recordings that shattered his public image. Yet somehow he always found a way back. Every time the world counted him out, he slipped through another opening in that tunnel, found another ally, another media opportunity, another chance to rewrite his story. But as the years passed, the illusion of Hulkamania began to fade and fans started to see through the myth. Through it all, The Undertaker stood firm, the steady, moral center of the wrestling world, unmoved by the chaos that swirled around him. The Undertaker's silence over the years spoke louder than words, because when he stayed quiet, it wasn't out of indifference, it was out of restraint. So when he finally decided to speak decades later, it wasn't gossip. It was history. Even in his honesty, he never denied Hulk Hogan's significance. He acknowledged him as one of wrestling's foundational figures, a true Mount Rushmore name. But that respect came with a condition. Without Hogan, there would be no WWE as we know it. Yet without Hogan's tunnel, the manipulation, the control, the illusion, we'd never understand how fragile that empire truly was. The Undertaker spoke like a man who had witnessed both the brilliance and the corruption, the victories and the betrayals that built modern wrestling. Over time, others began to share their own versions of the same truth. In one old interview, Vince McMahon once said, "When you're at the top of any field, people want to dig into your past and find out what you're about." He framed it as admiration, but The Undertaker saw it differently. That digging was part of Hogan's system, a way to gather information, not to destroy careers, but to control them. And Hogan had mastered that strategy long before anyone else. Even those closest to him, like his daughter Brooke, seemed to understand the two sides of the man behind the legend.
Hard and everybody's like, oh, Brooke stands by her dad and this and that. And it's like, first of all, that's who I am. I'm loyal. Like, if you're honest with me, it doesn't matter. I will love you. I will stand up for you till the end. People can have differing opinions, right? Like, I'm not God. I can't judge. I can't tell you if you're right or wrong. I'm not gonna.
Loyalty, that was the word that kept Hogan's tunnel alive. His family, his fans, and even his fellow wrestlers became part of the system that protected him, defending his image even when the truth was right in front of them. Over the years, Brooke Hogan's interviews revealed a daughter trying to show the human side of a man the world had turned into a larger-than-life character. Her compassion wasn't blind loyalty. It was a reflection of the humanity wrestling often forgets. And in that reflection, The Undertaker saw both sides: the man who had once accused him of nearly breaking his neck, and the machine that used that accusation as a weapon. What most fans never knew was that The Undertaker carried that memory quietly for years. It wasn't until the late 2010s, when podcasts and documentaries began re-examining wrestling's past, that he started to speak freely. His tone was calm, but underneath it was the sting of betrayal, not because Hogan had lied, but because he had convinced an entire generation to believe his own myth. By that time, The Undertaker's words were more than just reflections. They were an autopsy of an era. The death of kayfabe had uncovered what had long been buried in Hogan's tunnel. Yet even then, one mystery remained. How did Hogan always manage to return? Every time his image fell apart, every time fans turned against him, he would somehow reappear cleaner, sharper, more marketable than before. That wasn't luck. That was structure. The tunnel was still open, and Hogan was still walking through it. For The Undertaker, a man who built his legacy on mystery and authenticity, that realization was both fascinating and unsettling. Because while The Undertaker created darkness in the ring, Hulk Hogan had mastered it behind the scenes in the tunnel beneath Titan Towers.
Vince McMahon pulls me in his office. He says, listen, the next pay-per-view, you're wrestling Hulk Hogan, and you're going to make him tap out.
That was Kurt Angle, recalling the day he learned he'd be facing Hulk Hogan, and that he'd be the one to make Hogan submit. But the way Vince McMahon set it up told a very different story. Before Hogan even entered the room, Vince had arranged the scene like a psychological experiment. 2 chairs placed directly across from each other and a quiet instruction to Angle. When Hogan walks in, get right up in his face. What followed revealed everything. Hogan's ego was never built to lose, not even in a scripted match. Every decision, every storyline, every handshake had to serve one purpose: to protect the legend of Hulkamania. It was never just about winning in the ring. It was about controlling the story, maintaining power inside that unseen tunnel. That moment, now part of WWE's infamous backstage folklore, showed just how deep Hogan's reach truly went. He wasn't just another superstar, he was an institution that operated alongside and sometimes above Vince McMahon's own authority. Vince may have owned the company, but Hogan owned the perception. Even Vince would later admit in interviews that the business was never as scripted as people on the outside believed.
Married, so I pretty much was doing whatever I wanted to do. And, I kind of like got involved with Vince, and everybody says, oh, this business is a work. Okay. Well, if I'm making twice as much money as you and you're wrestling me, is that a work? That's a f***ing shoot.
In wrestling slang, a shoot means reality, and when Hulk Hogan called the business a shoot, he wasn't talking about what happened inside the ring. He was talking about the politics behind it all, the real battles fought in locker rooms, boardrooms, and contract negotiations. That was the true landscape of Hogan's tunnel. It didn't run under Titan Towers in Connecticut. It existed beneath the surface of the wrestling world itself, a web of favors, quiet alliances, and whispered threats that kept him untouchable. Even Vince McMahon, the man who built WWE into a global powerhouse, couldn't fully tear that system down. For years, he even benefited from it. Hogan's tunnel was McMahon's direct line to power, and together they used it to shape the image of professional wrestling rewriting reality as it unfolded. The tunnel couldn't be seen, but its presence was everywhere. It's what allowed Hogan to walk into Vince's office, play the injured hero, and walk out not only with sympathy, but with better storylines and creative control clauses that no one else would dare to request. That's why Bret Hart's later criticism calling Hogan a phony wasn't just bitterness. It was rebellion against a system that let one man's version of truth overshadow everyone else's. By the late 1990s, Hogan's tunnel had stretched far beyond WWE. When he joined WCW, he took his entire playbook with him, and under Ted Turner's enormous budget, he perfected the art of influence disguised as charisma and manipulation disguised as business strategy. Every company Hulk Hogan joined eventually bent itself around him, and when things fell apart, he was always the one left standing. Back in WWE, The Undertaker and the other locker room veterans had learned that lesson the hard way. Whenever Hogan was around, power shifted. Storylines changed overnight. Decisions were reversed without warning. Even Vince McMahon's infamous temper seemed to calm whenever Hogan's name was mentioned. There was a reason for that silence. Hogan wasn't just a superstar. He was the symbol of an entire mythology, the illusion of immortality that kept wrestling profitable. And immortality always needs secrecy. Behind the scenes, wrestlers whispered about late-night creative meetings held behind closed doors, far from the rest of the roster. Some even joked that Hogan's tunnel was a literal passage under Titan Towers, a secret route where he and Vince met to plan finishes, rewrite scripts, or map out controversial returns. It wasn't real, of course, but it represented something that was a hidden path Hogan used to maintain control. Even when scandals threatened to destroy him, the tunnel always reopened. After the 2016 Gawker lawsuit, when Hogan sued the outlet that leaked his private footage, most assumed his career and public life were finished. But Hogan won the case, and the fallout didn't just clear his name, it changed American media law. He walked away with a massive payout and somehow yet another redemption story.
I said, people aren't stupid. They have a good gut instinct on who people are. And you're a great dad, and everybody messes up. I always say, don't judge someone for sinning differently than you do. But, I think it was overall, even like bad things lead to good things.
Those were Brooke Hogan's words, measured, compassionate, and perfectly timed. In the aftermath of the lawsuit, she became the voice of empathy, reshaping her father's image from a disgraced celebrity into a flawed man who had learned from his mistakes. It was a masterclass in image rehabilitation, and it worked. By the time Hogan began reappearing in WWE conversations, the outrage had faded. His return moments, like Triple H's on-air tribute. So many of us were honored to call him a friend. The truth is, he captivated millions and inspired people around the world. Recast him once again as a living legend. The tunnel had done what it was built to do. It acted as a bridge between power and perception, feeding fans exactly what they needed to forgive and move on. Meanwhile, The Undertaker stayed on the outside, respected, untouchable, but intentionally distant. For years, he avoided speaking about Hogan, choosing loyalty to the business over the temptation to reveal its secrets. But when he finally began opening up in long-form interviews and podcasts, his tone carried a calm honesty. There was no anger, just understanding. He had seen too much to be naive. He had watched how figures like Hogan manipulated systems, rewrote histories, and weaponized charisma. Yet, he also recognized that without those manipulations, the wrestling world might not have endured. That was the paradox of Hogan's tunnel. It was both the decay and the foundation, the darkness that built the light. Every great empire, every unstoppable brand, hides a mechanism like that most secret corridor of influence where truths are traded behind closed doors. Hogan's version was just louder, flashier, and broadcast to the world. Even after retirement, traces of that tunnel remained. In interviews, Hogan would still speak in coded language about his relationship with Vince McMahon. In one clip, he said,
Shoot, it was the man that made the most money, so when I worked for Vince, and Bob Backlund was the champion, I wrestled Backlund. Backlund always got paid more than me. I said, oh, really? So this is no work. So it does matter if you win or lose. It does matter if you're the champion or not. Everybody goes, oh, it's a work. Well, it's really not a work. It's about the money and the mileage.
It wasn't just business pride, it was coded language. Hogan's words were a reminder that, in his world, money and power justified everything. That belief was the foundation of the tunnel, the idea that results didn't matter as long as profit did. The Undertaker, however, lived by a different code. For him, legacy was about honor, the ability to look another man in the eye and know that what happened in the ring stayed pure. But Hogan blurred that boundary until no one could tell where performance ended and manipulation began. In doing so, he reshaped the entire business. Despite all the controversies, Hogan remained an unshakable part of WWE's history because his tunnel connected every era, from the explosion of the 1980s to the chaos of the Attitude Era, from WCW's Monday Night Wars to the modern age of nostalgia. Whenever the company needed to remind fans of its roots, Hogan's image returned cleaned up, repackaged, and mythologized. When The Undertaker finally spoke openly about him, it wasn't to tear down his legacy, but to explain it, to map out the tunnel so future generations could understand where the secrets were buried. Every moment of glory came with a price. Every championship, every spotlight had a deal behind it. The biggest illusion in wrestling wasn't that the matches were fake, it was that the politics weren't real. And no one embodied that contradiction more completely than Hulk Hogan. By the time The Undertaker shared his story, fans began to connect the dots. The so-called tombstone injury had been the first test of the tunnel, a move that gave Hogan leverage, sympathy, and control over the narrative. From that moment on, every controversy, from his WCW creative power to his leaked scandals, became another checkpoint along that same underground path. Each time he survived, the tunnel grew wider. Even younger stars like Triple H, who once mocked Hogan's age and ego, eventually joined the mythology by praising him publicly. The company didn't just allow it, it needed it. Because Hogan's story wasn't separate from WWE's story. It was the story. The Undertaker understood that by finally speaking his truth, he wasn't attacking Hogan. He was revealing the machinery of fame itself, the hidden infrastructure that had kept them both legendary for decades. The tunnel wasn't evil. It was inevitable. Because in a world where perception equals power, everyone eventually digs their own. And after years of silence, The Undertaker had finally unearthed his.
Hogan? Hogan returned?
Here we go. When The Undertaker finally spoke about Hulk Hogan without holding back, there was a calmness in his voice that no amount of headlines or noise could overshadow. He wasn't angry, and he wasn't looking for revenge. He was simply finished pretending that the tunnel didn't exist. For decades, the entire wrestling world had lived inside that tunnel, guided by its shadows, loyal to its unwritten rules, and blind to the cost of following them. But now, the man who built his legacy on mystery and darkness was the one exposing it to light. What he revealed wasn't just a story of personal betrayal, it was the blueprint of a system that rewarded manipulation, punished honesty, and survived on spectacle. The Undertaker had stayed silent for more than 30 years. Watching careers rise and crumble overnight, seeing legends made and destroyed with a single rumor, a single phone call, or a single handshake inside that tunnel. He had witnessed how Hogan, the most recognizable name in wrestling history, mastered the art of using charm, fear, and influence as his greatest weapons.
Times in life, things come back.
All the podcasts and all the books and everything, and everybody realizes that Hogan wasn't the guy that he was portrayed to be.
I think the fans themselves have found out what kind of locker room guy he was, and it means a lot to the fans.
That's probably a good point. They have access now to everything. They kind of carry a grudge. The stuff with his, with his daughter and all the racial stuff and all that, and he's came back and he's got positive reactions.
That was Undertaker's calm dissection of what fans had always suspected, that authenticity couldn't be faked forever. In the modern era, nothing stayed hidden. Every whisper became a headline, every secret a viral clip. Yet the mythology endured. Hogan's name still stood tall, a mix of nostalgia, controversy, and undeniable influence. Undertaker never denied his importance. He simply redefined greatness. For him, greatness wasn't about manipulating the system, but surviving it. The tunnel was built for those who needed shortcuts. Undertaker thrived without them. Through the chaos of the 1990s, while Hogan chased control in WCW, Undertaker became WWE's moral compass, carrying the company with discipline and respect for the craft. When he finally spoke, it wasn't out of bitterness, but truth. Hogan's tunnel, he explained, wasn't one scandal or one scheme. It was a lifelong ritual, disappearing when things went dark, re-emerging spotless when the world was ready to forgive. And Brooke Hogan understood that cycle better than anyone.
And everybody was like, oh, Brooke stands by her dad and this and that. And it's like, first of all, that's who I am. I'm loyal. Like, if you're honest with me, it doesn't matter. I will love you. I will stand up for you till the end. People can have differing opinions, right? Like, I'm not God. I can't judge. I can't tell you if you're right or wrong. I'm not.
Her words weren't just about forgiveness. They were about recognition. She understood what it meant to stay loyal in a world that demanded selective blindness, and she saw the flaws in the man everyone else had turned into a monument. That same emotional honesty surfaced when Hogan himself admitted that Brooke should have been the one to walk away, but didn't.
And if anybody should have disowned me, it should have been her. She should have been the one.
That was Hogan acknowledging, perhaps for the first time, the true cost of the tunnel. The damage it caused wasn't only professional, it was deeply personal. For decades, that hidden web of manipulation and image control demanded loyalty from everyone, even family, forcing those around him to live inside the illusion to preserve the myth of Hulkamania, often at great personal expense. The Undertaker understood this intimately. Behind his silence wasn't resentment, but recognition. He had seen the same system consume other stars: Bret Hart, Randy Savage, Ultimate Warrior caught between the spotlight and the shadows. Wrestling wasn't just about drawing crowds, it was about surviving the politics. That's why his final reflection was so powerful. When he lifted the curtain, he wasn't exposing a scandal, he was showing how power operates when everyone pretends it doesn't exist. Hogan's tunnel wasn't a physical path. It was a way to move unseen, avoid accountability, rewrite consequences, and weaponize relationships. And as Undertaker observed, the system hadn't vanished, it had evolved. WWE, now a global enterprise, had adopted the same tactics, controlling perception through PR, documentaries, nostalgia marketing, and even monetizing controversies. Every scandal became a storyline. Every apology became content. Undertaker's decision to finally speak in the age of transparency was his quiet rebellion. He had carried the business for decades, preserved countless legacies, and built his own without relying on manipulation. When he spoke about Hogan, it wasn't to tear him down, it was to tell the truth. He was performing a post-mortem on the industry they both had built, revealing truths that were uncomfortable but necessary. Hogan's power didn't come from his strength. It came from his connections. His influence wasn't just charisma, it was how he wielded that charisma to control others. And his tunnel didn't vanish with retirement. It persisted in every executive choice that favored image over truth. That's what The Undertaker meant when he said fans carried a grudge. They weren't angry that Hogan failed, but that they finally saw the tunnel and realized how long it had been shaping the business. His confession transformed the way fans viewed the golden era. What had once been nostalgia became real history, messy, flawed, human. For Hogan, who spent his career insisting on immortality, that was the true end of Hulkamania, because immortality depends on illusion, and Undertaker had pulled back the curtain. In later appearances, Undertaker spoke of forgiveness, not sentimentally, but as a form of release. He had no desire for revenge. He had outlasted everyone who tried to use the tunnel against him. And when asked about Hogan's legacy, he didn't hesitate to acknowledge that, despite everything, Hogan still belonged on wrestling's Mount Rushmore. It wasn't approval, it was recognition.
No, he's a Mount Rushmore guy.
Yeah, he's a Mount Rushmore.
Because even the builders of the tunnel shaped the mountain. Hogan's flaws didn't erase his impact, they explained it, gave it depth, made it human. That was what The Undertaker's silence had truly been about, waiting until the myth had lost enough of its power to be spoken as truth. When he finally did, fans didn't hear bitterness, they felt closure. The tunnel was real, but it wasn't eternal. Every secret eventually surfaces. Every buried truth sees daylight. In the end, Hogan's secret tunnel wasn't just about him navigating wrestling's politics. It was about the invisible structures that govern every empire. Every celebrity, every system built on loyalty and fear. Undertaker exposed it not by yelling, but by surviving it. He walked through it and emerged unscathed. That's why his words matter now, more than ever. They're not just about wrestling, but about the cost of image, the fragility of power, and the inevitability of truth. When the lights dim, the music fades, and the crowd grows silent, what remains are the men behind the characters. One built the tunnel, the other endured it.